Hello, greetings from Soho. This is the Bureau of Lost Culture. I'm Stephen Coates. Now listen, if you dig the Bureau of Lost Culture, if you dig the stories we tell, the tales we unearth, why don't you leave us a review wherever you listen to this? Or you can even email us, bureauoflostculture@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. Now, many young people have made that journey to London, like kind of Dick Whittingtons of both genders, seeking fame, fortune or fun. And my guest today is one of them, the delightful Diana CRAWSHAW. She came down to this city from Ilkley in Yorkshire in the cold, cold winter of 1963 when we all thought the world would freeze, according to Nick Laird-Close. And with her friends, she landed in Carnaby Street and started to enter the world of swinging 60s. Working in Sambo fashions on the Dolly Rocker range, going off to St Tropez, stargazing, trying to find herself hitchhiking to Nepal. And then on her return, working in two of the most influential groovy boutiques of the time. First of all, Lord Kitchener's Valet on the King's Road in Chelsea. And then the amazing Mr. Freedom, where the great and the good and the glitterati of those years came to shop and be dressed. Hockney, Picasso, Rock Hudson, the Beatles, Freddie Mercury amongst them. We hear about fixing Raquel Welch's hot pants, making innovative designs using boxing boot laces, basketball gear and applique. We hear about making Dennis Hopper cry. We hear about the boutique Paradise Garage at 430 Kings Road, still occupied by Vivienne Westwood and us. And we get a wonderful insight into designing, making and selling cool clothes in the late 60s and 70s before Diana morphed into what she still is, a palm reader. We hear about reading palms at Richard Branson's Virgin headquarters and meeting the man himself coming out of the loo. I'm very pleased to welcome her to the Bureau of Lost Culture. Welcome, Diana.
Hello, how are you?
Good. You know, I'm sitting here in Soho, in this on this wintry day, and I'm imagining that we're in a time machine and we're winding back through the years, through the decades. Let's pretend it's 1963. And you said, I came to London in the winter of 63, the big freeze, after being at Leeds College of Art, studying art and fashion. I couldn't wait to get away from the narrow suburban life of Ilkley, where everybody knew you. The Beatles had just hit, and the fashions were exciting and new. Mary Quant and the miniskirt had taken the world by storm. I wanted to disappear into this world of music and pop stars, irreverent humour and satire. Tell us a bit more about it. You were born in the north, Ilkley, for anybody who doesn't know, is in York, a small town in the north of England. And so was that pull of London always, there for you through your teens?
Yes, I really wanted to get down to London and Chelsea because I'd read about it, and it just attracted me. And Ilkley is a very small town, and I went to Leeds College of Art and studied fashion there and all that. But it's a kind of narrow upbringing because everybody knows you. There's no sort of freedom really, yeah. And I wanted to be almost anonymous. I wanted to disappear, I suppose. Can
you remember actually sort of arriving in London at that time? It was a very exciting time, I suppose, wasn't it? I mean, the big freeze, for anybody who doesn't know, was that this winter, this 63 winter was in the middle of the Cold War, appropriately enough. It was this super cold winter, and also the time, I think, around about the same time as the whole Cuban Missile Crisis and the Kennedys and all that, wasn't it?
It was a turning point, I suppose, in many ways. I was attracted to London. My boyfriend had actually gone there to begin with. He was a photographer called Clive MacLean, and he became very famous for doing nude photography, Playboy and all that sort of. When I knew him, he wasn't doing that sort of thing, but he had studied photography and art at Bradford College of Art, and he came down and got some little tiny room to lodge in, and he went off for a week somewhere, and he hadn't paid his rent, so his landlady chucked his camera out and all his folio of all his work into a dustbin.
Ouch.
So he was absolutely without anything to show. And so he started to do other things, and he started to get work. He worked in Carnaby Street, in a cafe in Carnaby Street, first of all. And then he met up with Robert Orbach, who used to go into the cafe. And Robert Orbach is quite famous now because he used to run lots of shops in Carnaby Street, and he's been a friend of mine for years. And Robert said, I'll give you a job in the shop, in one of the shops, selling trousers, selling jeans and jackets and things like that. So he was there already. He'd arrived in London already. When I came to London, I hadn't got a job or anything. And I walked into a place in Hanover Square, which was called Sambo Fashions, which wouldn't be allowed these days. The Sambo Fashions was a very well-established company, and they did beautiful clothes, and it was all very well made. And they brought me into the showroom and looked at my drawings and said, "Oh, right, can you cut patterns?" I wasn't very good at cutting patterns, actually. And I said, "Well, yes." And they said, "Oh, we like your drawings, we like these." And so they took me on, and they had just started a new range called Dolly Rocker.
Tell us about it.
It was a new range for young people, inverted commas, and they were about £5 or £6 a dress. And they just had very little collars, little bow at the neck, or a little rose, and girls were wearing those to go to the clubs in. It was like a little dress you could dance in. And Patty Boyd happened to be their face.
So Patty Boyd was a model who went on later to be married to George Harrison and Eric Clapton.
George Harrison's lady. Yeah. And she was just cheeky looking. She had little bunches, hair in bunches and a fringe, and big wide eyes. And she was the face of Dolly Rocker. And that was really quite strange, really, because she rocketed Dolly Rocker into the public eye much more, because she just started going out with George Harrison. And so she was seen in lots of the press were following her, and so it was very good for the people that I worked for to have her as the face of Dolly Rockers.
This was the time when all that stuff was mixing up together. I mean, you'd said, that Carnaby Street was a place where, film stars and pop stars, went to get dressed. Were chased down the street by streaming girls. So you got the Beatles to come to London and, hanging out. So you got counterculture and over-the-counter culture, as it were. And
Carnaby Street was really dressing all these pop stars, where these flared hipster trousers, really well cut, because they had good tailors down in Carnaby Street. So a lot of the pop stars and film stars were getting their clothes there.
Before we go back to your sort of design life, where were you living?
I got a flat in South Kensington. I shared it with a girl that had come from Ilkley as well. And it was 8 guineas a week, £8, 8 shillings a week.
That's changed a bit.
Or £7, 7 shillings a week. And it was a one room, and it was a conservatory that had been converted into a flat where people could live. So it was glass everywhere. The outside was glass, and all the landlady had done was wallpaper over the glass. So that freezing winter, I was in that flat, wrapped up in fur coats, and I couldn't understand why it was so cold. There was just glass walls. And Christmas came, and we sort of sellotaped Christmas cards onto these walls. And they curled in funnels, as they do when they get damp, Christmas cards. And so there were these funnels of Christmas cards.
I'm guessing, though, that actually, I mean, you said you come from the north. You landed this job, right in the heart of sort of hipster London, as it was then. And it must have been a very exciting time, right?
I'm always interested in people. You saw people going past the main door of where I was working. You'd see Sean Connery or somebody walking past. I've never seen all these faces, but Vogue was across the square. Vogue House was across the square. And so you've got people like Jean Shrimpton coming past. So you're sort of people watching. And it was interesting for me to see, like, oh, that's the writer, that's so-and-so, the great writer, or that's there's Sean Connery's girlfriend, or whatever. Really loving to see all the people that I'd only read about suddenly in reality. And the boss gave me some money, a sort of expense account, and said, you've got to go and watch people. And so he gave me money to go to clubs. So I went with Clyde, the boyfriend, and we went to various clubs and saw what people were wearing and picked up the new dances and everything.
So that was your kind of research, really, for the designs that you were doing at the time. You said also that the place that you worked at, I mean, you'd mentioned that Carnaby Street, which is just around the corner from where I am now, you know, it had this history of tailoring. So good quality stuff was being made. And you said that, you know, the place that you worked, okay, you know, Patty Boy was the face of it, but sort of back of house, it was machinists working really hard. You know, with very regulated hours and tea breaks and stuff.
And the machinists were all sort of, you know, oh, yes, well, my bad leg. And they were talking about, you know, what they were going to have for tea and gossiping all the time. And there was this dreadful Jimmy Young blaring across from the radio.
Horrible, easy listening radio. And you were saying that you were quite stifled, but this is the interesting thing, because you mentioned the boss now, who seems quite enlightened if he was going to give you an expense account to go to the clubs with your boyfriend. But he took you under his wing, didn't he? And you know, and then started to take you off to all sorts of exotic places.
He sent me. He and his wife sort of saw something in me, because I was always very honest. I didn't sort of try to say what they wanted me to say. I had this slight Yorkshire accent, and it sort of amused them. And his wife said, "Now, come on, my dear, you know, I'm going to send you to my hairdresser, Renee, and get this long hair cut." And so she had it cut in the fashionable bob, you know, the short, bouncy hair. And Sam bought me a wonderful black double-breasted PVC jacket, and I wore with these high boots. I started to really, I started to get to look a bit more like the people I was watching. And then he sent me to St Tropez.
I love this guy. I mean, he's the sort of boss you want, right?
He was wonderful, because he'd say, come and talk to your old dad. He was like a dad to me. And he'd just say, "Now come on," and he had a bit of a stammer, and he said, "Now, I want you to do this, and I know that you want to do really much more exciting designs, but this what we want now is we want some very commercial ideas for the Selfridges and the John Lewises and all the big stores that they sold to. They sold Dolly Rockers in the thousands, so they didn't really want too much of a rebel in their midst, saying, listen, I want this to be like, this, it's got to be shorter, this has got to be..." They were trying to get me to design things that their buyers would buy.
Right, so mainstream kind of, you know, commercial stuff for kind of cool, hip young people, but nothing too exotic or nothing too daring.
That's right. And then they sent me to St Tropez, which I'm not sure whether that was a good idea, because I got out there, I got on this plane. I'd never been to the south of France before in my life. I unwittingly booked into the only gay hotel in St Tropez, and the guys there looked after me like their little sister, and took me out on the port in the evening. I don't know whether it was to sort of be like a decoy to attract a few boys as well, but they'd take me out on the port and watch this parade of famous people who gathered in St Tropez each evening on the quay. Like you'd see Picasso, or you'd see Kirk Douglas, or Bob Mitchum. I think that's Bob Mitchum. I said, "Oh yes, he comes many times." It was just sort of casual. Nobody was screaming and running after these stars, because these stars were just the normal thing to see. They'd come down from Nice, or just coming round to St Tropez, or they'd come round to pick up a boyfriend or a girlfriend as well, because it was a bit like it was a bit like a parade.
I mean, you're getting paid to be there, so part of it was for you to sort of, research, take it all, drink it all in,
Yeah,
to sort of understand what the latest fashionable moves were and what, the glitterati were wearing, so that could be sort of reinterpreted and retranslated into stuff when you got back to London. Is that right?
that's right. Well, they didn't give me very much money to exist on while I was there. And, they said, well, stay for another week, because I was loving it so much. So I ended up keeping lettuces in my wash bowl. I'd sort of go to the market and buy a lettuce and buy some tomatoes and various things, and then just keep them in the cold water in the wash bowl in the hotel room. And then I met this boy who was a millionaire's son, who was working in one of the shops on the end of the port. He was actually, his parents were titled, I think, and they had real impressionist paintings inside their flat. And he sort of roared me around on the back of his scooter, backwards and forwards, up and down. And he didn't actually help me out financially or anything like that, but he took me to clubs that I wouldn't have been able to afford to get into. We went up to this club, Beatles, the club on the top of the hill, very luxurious. And there were people from Tamla Motown performing up there, which was, I loved Tamla Motown. So it was like I'd just gone to heaven. There was I in St Tropez listening to Tamla Motown stars singing live and dancing, and then he'd take me home on the back of his scooter.
It's a long way from Ilkley.
Yeah, yes, it was. I was just lucky because I was thrown in at the deep end. I had no money, and I was kind of truthful. I'd say what I thought, or things like that weren't really accepted in St Tropez society. They say, you're very funny because you say what you think.
Well, what happened when you got back to London?
Well, I loved it. I loved going back to London, and I really wanted to do something a bit more exciting. I moved into a flat with 3 other boys at number 8 Ladbroke Grove, and 2 of them were at art college with me, and another one was a ex-public school boy, and very intelligent and everything. And he started to sort of talk to me, and he said, you need to find yourself. Daddy, what are you talking about? You're just talking platitudes. He persuaded me to leave the job and hitchhike to Nepal with him. So I had to go and tell the news to Sam Sherman. Say, I want to leave. And he said, what? I said, well, I need to go and find myself. And he said, what do you mean, dear, find yourself? Haven't you found yourself already, dear? I say, well, I've got to see the world and see the meaning of life and all that. Well, you know the meaning of life, dear. It's there in front of us. He was so lovely. So he said, listen, I can't persuade you, because he couldn't. He kept trying. He said, listen, I'll ask you one more time. You got to stay. Do you need some more money? Do you need me to give you a raise? No, I just need to go. He said, all right. Go, but when you come back, which you will, come and see your old dad, and I'll give you some sort of help.
What a sweetie! I mean, I'm loving this guy. He sounds amazing.
I got as far as Rhodes, a hitchhike through Italy. Very dangerous, hitching through Italy in tight hipster pants and a skinny ribbed jumper with no bra.
I'm not trying it.
The boyfriend would hide behind a rock.
Classic hitchhiking technique.
The big lorry would screech to a halt. Say, ciao, and I'd come towards the truck, and then the bearded boyfriend, would come from behind the rock, and the lorry driver would go, oh, mamma mia, hit his forehead with his fist, Right. As long as I would sit next to the driver, that was okay. So I had to sit next to the gear stick, which he kept changing the gear with my leg.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just thinking when you're talking then about going off and finding yourself, a classic mid-60s thing. I mean, I was thinking of that film The Graduate as well, when they take off, to kind of cross America. And very much of the time, I suppose, that the countercultural time, isn't it? The notion that you would, as a young person, that you would go off to some eastern place and bathe in exotic wisdom and be transformed before you came back, right?
Yes, that was the time. But because it hadn't worked out, this trying to go and find yourself. And the boyfriend had fallen ill by the time we got to Rhodes. I was practically carrying him. He got so ill. And we came back up through Italy. And the boyfriend was sitting in next to the driver. And there was nowhere for me to be. So I actually had to lie on the truck, at the back of this flatbed truck, as it was going up the Autostrada, is it called, the Italian one? On this flatbed truck, going at 80 miles an hour up the main motorway, going up towards northern Italy, covered in a rug. I thought, what am I doing? I mean, I could easily have been killed. I could have easily fallen off. It was just complete madness. So I came back to sanity. And so Sam said, listen, you're going to need some money while you decide what to do. Your job's here for you, but I know that you've had a bit of a change of heart about everything. And so, I told you to come and see me. I will give you so much a week. Come and see me and I'll give you some money so that you can keep yourself, so that you can pay the rent and things like that.
This guy sounds like some sort of angel.
He was. And he wasn't like a lot of these rag trade bosses who were after getting you into bed and all that stuff. He was just like a good father to me. And so I didn't go back and work for him because I got offered a very, very good job with lots of money with another company. And so I started to do that. The person who offered me lots of money to work for them was actually a little bit free with their hands. And I realized that there was more to it than just working and designing dresses for him. So I left, and I was, what shall I do now? And Robert Orbach, who had been a good friend of Clive MacLean, my old boyfriend, and who'd worked in Carnaby Street, met me and said, listen, we need somebody for our new shop in the King's Road. I was Lord Kitchener's valet. We need some staff. So come on, you can do it. And we'll give you this much money a week. And so that started me working on the King's Road at last, because this was really where I thought everything happened. And it did.
So you've gone from the sort of one of the centres of swing in London, in Soho and Carnaby Street, straight to the other one, Chelsea and the King's Road, right?
Yeah, where I was walking around in sort of King's Road clothes, and it was exciting. We had all the latest music being played in the shop, because Harlequin Records down the road, the guy used to bring us in the new releases whenever they came out. So we had all the latest Beach Boys sounds and all the Animals and all those different sounds. And the cars outside were banging into each other because of models and beautiful people and film stars parading down along the pavement every Saturday afternoon. So every now and again you heard this loud bang where a car had just banged into the one in front because the guy was rubbernecking, looking at a girl in a miniskirt. And we'd all come out of the shop and applaud. Hooray!
And for anybody who doesn't know, I mean, I was Lord Kitchener's valet. It was this boutique that it became famous because it was the first one to really, promote these what had been sort of antique military uniforms, sort of repurposed, as it were, as they say these days.
Naval greatcoats.
Naval greatcoats and the kind of and that sort of Boer War style kind of red with lots of decorations. And they repurposed those, and they became part of that kind of psychedelic wardrobe,
Well,
didn't they?
because the Beatles were wearing that sort of thing. You know, look on the old Beatles albums, and they're in Sgt. Pepper. They're wearing those uniforms, those military uniforms. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. It had become the sort of thing that a lot of people were wearing. People who had no affinity with the military at all, hippies who were, love and peace and give a flower to somebody and ban the bomb, were all wearing military uniforms.
Which was one of the things which started to wind up, I think, didn't it? The older generation at the time, is this kind of reappropriation of this military wear by the flower power kids, right?
Yeah, and it was cheap, you see, because you could go up to Lawrence Corner, which sold all the ex-military uniforms very cheaply. They had warehouses full of ex-military stuff. So you could buy something quite cheaply. You could buy the front buttoning sailor trousers and these jackets for not a huge amount of money. And then the guys got hold of these sailor trousers and dyed them in all different colours. They were cotton, but and so you'd have pale blue ones and you'd have bright pink ones. But they were commissioning the military of the past, the military uniform of the past, for the dope-smoking hippies.
Right. Well, but at this time you were really just kind of working in the shop. You weren't doing design so much, but the next thing that you do is really where you kind of came into your own, isn't it?
I was working in that shop for a while, and then Robert again said, listen, that we need you down at Mr. Freedom. There's a shop down the road that's called Mr. Freedom. It's just opened, and their designer has gone AWOL. So I said, look, Robert, I don't want to do any... Yeah, he'd always bring me all sorts of propositions for different jobs. I said, Robert, I don't want to work at that place. And he said, no, please, believe me, this is a really good place. It's really good. It's going to be a great opportunity for you. I've told them all about you, and you've got to come, and you're coming now. And we got in a taxi and went down to the King's Road. And that was Mr. Freedom. And it was a beautiful little shop. It's where Vivienne Westwood's shop is now. It's a tiny sort of corner. It's a shop on a corner. And so I went down there, and Robert just said, I brought Diana. She's going to design for you. And she can design. She's designed a long time. She did dolly rockers, and she knows what to do, and she cut a pan. And so I was handed over to them. Mr. Freedom being the newest, most exciting shop, where it attracted people from all over the world. It attracted, again, those film stars and people that had been walking up and down the King's Road, and the Beatles and everybody ended up in Mr. Freedom.
Tommy Roberts, the guy there. I mean, he had quite a sort of history already, wasn't he? And he was quite pivotal, wasn't he, in that whole countercultural swinging London scene.
He was somebody who could draw people to him. He was somebody who was sort of charismatic. He was the little fat guy who, come on, yeah, that'd be nice, yeah, oh, that's a good idea. He didn't actually design things, but he drew people around him who could. And so people were brought in who could do applique work, satin applique, Mickey Mouses on tops of T-shirts. That grew from being a little shop and attracting an enormous amount of people into being a big shop in Church Street, Kensington.
You had the sort of great and good, hadn't you? Hockney, Peter Blake, Picasso, the Beatles, Rock Hudson, and of course you had this sort of strange interaction with Raquel Welch. Tell us about that.
Yes, I went down into the shop. Somebody said, "Can you go down? There's somebody who wants to speak to you." And there was Raquel Welch with this enormous bodyguard, and she'd got her eye on this little pair of velveteen hot pants, which Mr. Freedom specialised in hot pants. But she said they're a little bit too short, a little bit too revealing, which I thought was very funny because Raquel Welch was, such a revealing sort of person. And she said, can you possibly make them a little bit longer? So, yeah, okay, give me some time. So I went upstairs into the workroom and I made a false hem. I made a sort of facing on the bottom, which took a little while. And so it didn't look bad, it looked good. And took them back downstairs. And there was this huge bodyguard and he just said, right, I'll take those. And then she suddenly jumped up from behind the clothing rail where she'd been hiding because, she couldn't really go in any shop without being mobbed. She was so famous and so beautiful. So she was shyly hiding behind all these clothes and emerged and was very pleased with them and said, oh, thank you so much. And then off they went.
Now, Paul Gorman told me, Diana, that you've got a story about meeting Dennis Hopper as well.
Yes. Now, well, that was the Royal College of Art do. There was a big ball called the White Ball. And everything was white. Everybody was dressed in white. And my boyfriend from Bradford College of Art, Clive MacLean, who became the nude photographer later on in his life, he and I went to this white ball. And Clive had been at art college with Hockney. So they knew him, you see. So he said, oh, there's David over there. We'll go and have a word with him. Come on. So we went across, and standing in the middle of this ballroom, there we were talking to Hockney. And Hockney had Dennis Hopper with him. And Dennis Hopper was just standing there like a spare balloon. And so he started talking to me as Clive was deep in conversation with Hockney. And Dennis Hopper said, where'd you come from? And I told him, I said, well, it's a little place called Ilkley. It's in the middle of a valley. And he said, oh, what's it like? And I said, oh, it's beautiful. There's a countryside, and sometimes I go up into the woods by the moors when I get home from London and just can't wait to get up there and get up by the streams and the trees and everything. And I just lie down with my nose into the ground and breathe in and go, wonderful smell of the grass and the moss and everything. And I said, then I feel okay. And he was standing there looking at me with tears coming out of his eyes. Aww. And he just put his arms around me and buried his head in the side of my neck. And he started to sob. And he said, you don't know how long it is since I heard anybody talk like that. Thank you. It was like, everybody was very false and everybody in the show business and all that. And he'd suddenly heard somebody talking about something which was grassroots, which was genuine and nobody was trying to pose or anything. I was just talking to him about burying my nose in the moss.
You've got to love it. That's what got to Dennis Hopper. Sweetie, obviously a sweetie himself underneath. But then let's talk a little bit about your designs at Mr. Freedom because, you mentioned it, very, very influential boutique. Freddie Mercury was getting dressed there and all those sort of people. And the designs that you were doing there, they were really quite avant-garde in a way, weren't they? And sort of very experimental with use of fabrics and combining things. And I know Paul was saying as well, how well made they were as well.
Yes, they were well made because they were made out in a factory in South London by a Turkish guy and his sister who worked day and night making these wonderful clothes. And nothing was skipped or they made them properly. And so we'd go out to the factory and take the new pattern that I'd done or whatever, and then see it through from the beginning, do the sample, get the girl to do the sample, and get the shapes, like the baseball suit. The baseball suit I did with the lace up the front? They were boxing boots laces, actually, that I got in a boxing supplies shop in Hammersmith and dyed them yellow. So I made them, it looked like a shoe. The top looked like a baseball boot, really, laced up at the front, and then it had the side patches, which you normally have on the ankle of the boot. These side patches, which were just at the side of either side of the bust. And it had a tongue as well coming out the top. And then I did the trousers looking a bit like the sort of basketball trousers with shapes over the knees. So it took a long time to get it right, that style, to get the right proportions and everything. But you'd be out in this factory with the freezing cold wind howling through the goods yard door, and trucks backing in with different supplies. And you would go, no, that's got to be 3/8 of an inch longer, or this has got to be like this. So we'd work on it. We were wearing fur gloves and boots and scarves in this howling wind, and that was the Mr. Freedom. That was the Mr. Freedom factory.
Well, I mean, the shop was described as having an unquenchable enthusiasm for all things bright and in outrageously bad taste. And of course, I don't know whether you were involved in it, but I mean, those early 70s Elton John outfits, quite outrageous glamour outfits. And that all came from Mr. Freedom, all the designers there, right?
Yes. Jim O'Connor did a few things for him, and he really, certain things which were more of Jim O'Connor's handwriting, really, than mine. But everybody, Chris Snow was there, who was doing applique. He was the expert at applique. You know what applique is, don't you?
Well, explain it for us, yeah.
You put, you make a design of, say, a little horse coming over the top of a hill or something, and then you make that out of satin, different shapes out of satin, and then stitch it down, and that then gets padded as well with a sort of K-pop padding, and that would go on the back of a jacket, and I did a dress I called it a sizzler coat. It's a big Mongolian fur high-collared coat, a film star coat, really. Like you would go to, you'd look glamorous in that coat. It was high-collared, white Mongolian lamb, fake Mongolian lamb, and then came cinched in at the waist and then flared right out in the skirt part, and that was in pale blue satin. And the back, I designed the applique that went right up the back. So very childlike appliques in Mr. Freedom, really, when you think about it. I did a little winding road, and it was a bit like Somewhere Over the Rainbow. It was a little person skipping up this winding road through different bushes and mountains and whistling. And that was all in satin applique up the back of this rather glamorous coat that somebody would be wearing who wasn't at all into little boys skipping up the back of the road.
Mr. Freedom sort of moves on. Became a bit more successful, I suppose, and a bit more corporate.
They became a bit big, and they moved clocking in machines into the shop. It lost the ethos. It lost the ethos of freedom, really. Not that anybody wanted to pinch anything, but they put security guards on the doors. It became too successful, and putting the clocking in machines, and there was a lack of individuality, and they were sacking certain people who worked in the shop because they were such characters that they didn't always go by the rules. And there was one boy called Harold, who was a Ted. He was a teddy boy. He called himself Harold. He used to have a cigarette sticking out the side of his mouth, and he wore all the Mr. Freedom stuff. And he was a member of staff at Mr. Freedom. So you had these wonderful characters. But when Lord Kitchener's came in and went into partnership with Mr. Freedom, he didn't want people larking about and skiving off or hanging about with a cigarette hanging out their mouths or whatever. And he put clocking in machines in and got rid of a few people and said, this has got to be like this and this has got to be a row of like this and you've got to tidy this up and get this out. And we just thought, actually, it's not the same as it was. And so Trevor Miles, who was the sort of guiding light of Mr. Freedom, and Chris Snow, who did the applique, and I left. And Trevor said, we're going, go home and wait for us to call you. We've got something lined up that you'll just love. And so just don't worry. So I'm without a job, and I go home and wait. And they ring me up and say, we're coming to get you. And I hear this coming along the road. And there's this enormous American car coming along the road with Trevor and Chris sitting in the front. And Mustang. Is it Mustang?
Ford Mustang,
and said, come on. And so I dashed down the stairs, and me and my dog jumped in the back, and we all roared off. And I said, where are we going? Wait and see. Wait and see. We go roaring along the King's Road, and we get to where the old Mr. Freedom was. The old shop which had all its shutters up and everything. And Trevor takes the key out, opens the door. He said, this is where we're going to be. This is our new shop. And we're going to call it Paradise Garage.
That location, as you mentioned earlier, has sort of stayed in the boutique era, isn't it? You know, McLaren and Westwood took it over with Let It Rock, and just I think Westwood's still there now, right? So that little patch of Chelsea is kind of the continuous theme of swinging London and cool alternative clothing.
It's got some sort of energy about it, that corner. I don't know, really, but it has.
So Mr. Freedom had gone off, like, I mean, some of those other boutiques had. They got bigger, more commercial. Also, they started doing lots of pop-art furniture and lifestyle things as well. But you guys had sort of stayed true to this kind of countercultural, independent vibe, right?
We started selling Hawaiian shirts and used jeans that were all sort of patched and ragged and cut off. We got, trunk loads of used jeans brought in from the States, because the States had these warehouses full of old jeans that were worn at the knee or whatever, got thrown away. And so these aircraft loads of clothes came over, and we were putting patches on them or cutting off the bottoms, and they were selling. And the Hawaiian shirts we had, and we had bowling shirts as well. And we played Hawaiian music, and we got bamboo poles and strung rope across the side and down. So the clothing rails were made out of big, thick bamboo poles. So it's like being on a South Sea island.
Quite tiki, yeah.
And the floor was kind of rattan matting, and there was a big oil drum. We went and found these great big oil drums. That was the setting, and people started coming. All the old Mr. Freedom people who loved the old Mr. Freedom came, and because Trevor was quite charismatic as well, and he would talk to people in clubs and say, you've got to come and see our new shop. You'll love it. And so back came, the Kirk Douglases and the Liz Taylors and the Raquel Welches, and the normal people as well, to Paradise Garage.
Diana, can I just ask you, so at the same time as all this is going on, I mean, you're living your life in London, and that thing about, being out in the clubs, on the streets, doing your kind of visual research by people watching, what are young people wearing, what they're coming up with themselves, what are the latest or even the next things, or getting your inspiration. That was always going on at the same time, was it?
I think I was more hooked into the vibe of what Trevor and Chris Snow and a few other people were thinking, which was going with the vintage. The vintage clothing thing started hitting the King's Road. So there was the old 1940s, 1950s jackets, the teddy boy look thing, Lloyd Johnson. People were attracted to those sort of clothes and started wearing them. So you have these enormous, great big suede shoes, and you saw the people walking along the King's Road wearing stuff from the 40s and 50s. Do you understand?
Yeah, I do, of course. But was that a kind of remade, reinterpreted, or repurposed stuff, or was it just straight out of the dressing like you're in some 1940s gangster film?
It was just a direction. You couldn't afford a lot of new clothes anyway, and you went to Portobello on a Saturday morning and picked up things. Oh, I found this great this 1950s fleck jacket with a velvet collar. These were old clothes that people had thrown away and were being sold on Portobello. So you're picking up vintage clothes and wearing them, and mixing vintage clothes as well. You'd be wearing a Victorian blouse and a pair of skin-tight, drain-pipe denim jeans.
It's interesting, though, isn't it, that the whole retro vintage thing started that far back. I was at Brick Lane at the weekend, walking up Brick Lane, and of course, there's a whole vintage market there. There's a couple of Rocket and there's a couple of other big shops, selling that stuff, and of course now it's prime prices. You're paying. Oh yeah. You'd be paying hundreds for a piece like you just mentioned there, like a 50s jacket, like that.
Yes. And it never quite goes away because there's great quality in those clothes. There's great quality of manufacturing, and there's great character in those clothes. And you're not going to see anybody else wearing that jacket that you've just got from the antique market or from Portobello or whatever, because there aren't any more of them. Or a bowling shirt. We sold lots of bowling shirts. You'd get bowling shirts over, and they'd have like Sadie appliqued on the front, and that shirt had actually belonged to somebody called Sadie, who was a bowler. You'd find all sorts of things which you'd wear in a sort of a humorous way, but they'd be very sexy as well. So you mix the clothes together.
And that ties in with what you do next, because then you started getting invited or asked to make clothes, especially for TV commercials and for all that sort of stuff. And the next phase for you really was that you started to travel a lot more, didn't you? You started to get out about in the world again, right?
I worked for various other companies as well, and I worked with Trevor as well in other companies. And so he'd say, we're going to Hong Kong to get manufacturing out there. And I worked for Plaza, where Anthony Price was the mainstay at Plaza, but they opened up a little sideline and called it Secret Ingredient, and that was more body wear, footless tights and skin-tight, body-revealing clothes. Anthony Price, to me, is the most clever designer that I've ever seen, ever met. He's a perfectionist. He did all Brian Ferry's suits. I'd see him working into the night, perfecting a shape. He would build a shape on top of a dummy, of a tailor's dummy, which was the shape of the person he was going to be dressing. So he had quite a few shells, which were in a big cupboard. One film star's body, or this is so-and-so's body. So he'd just be able to strap that onto the dummy, and this film star would say, I need a couple more dresses, but in a different cloth or in a different colour. Can you do it? And he would work on those dresses, not needing for that star to come over from America.
Again, another northerner, right? Another person from Yorkshire. And,
yes.
He dressed all sorts of people, didn't he? David Bowie, Rob Palmer, Steve Strange, Duran
Yeah,
Duran, Brian Ferry, Roxy Music. And
yeah.
it's all sorts of people. But for you, I mean, you started to travel, you started to work on commercials and stuff. You're saying that you went to Hong Kong, Casablanca. This is the time, I think this is the time actually, when you started to morph into what really became your new career, isn't it?
I've always been interested in people and somehow how their shape and how their hands show their character. You can get somebody who's got really, really clumsy hands or a clumsy face, if you like, if there's such a thing, and they can't help what they are. They've just been built like that, and their mentality is clumsy, or the mentality is greedy or impatient. If they have very, very short, tiny fingers that are stubby, they can't help being impatient and angry or short-tempered. That is the way their brain is constructed. Markets that I used to go to all those years, I'd pick up old Victorian books on palm reading because they were heavily into that. So there'd be these diagrams of different palms, but not just palms, fingers and fingerprints. The actual circles on the ends of the finger show you an awful lot about the brain work of a person. So to me, it was a fascinating thing which I never stopped investigating. And so I started to sometimes just look at somebody's hand in a pub. And I said, no wonder you're a bad-tempered old git. Or I feel sorry for you because you can't help it. And they go, yeah, I know. I just don't seem to be able to control my temper. And then you'd see also that they were really heavily into sweets and chocolates and salt and stuff that made their mood different. And so you'd say, look, why don't you just drop very, very salty foods or cut down on the alcohol or whatever? You've got this kind of basis in your makeup that you've inherited from your dad or your mother of being rather a short-tempered person. But maybe you could stop that from continuing by realizing that you are this sort of machine that has this kind of mentality, and maybe you could start to help yourself in some way. And they go, oh, can I come and see you again? What do you think about my sister? She wants to come and see you. And so I said, oh, no, don't bring everybody in. I'm not going to start standing here reading people's hands. I started reading hands in an art gallery in the King's Road. Somebody said, oh, come, because we've got plenty of people that come in the art gallery. They'd love to have their hands read. So I started in that King's Road in an art gallery, when I think about it. And then Richard Branson really gave me a big helping hand, gave me an opportunity.
I mean, we think about Richard Branson as daredevil, super successful entrepreneur and businessman, but of course he was a big part of the kind of countercultural stuff.
I knew him by sight, really, years and years before that, when he had a little shop. And he had rather bad teeth and not terribly attractive, and he was just quite shy and kind of, hi, yeah, hi, and a bit spotty. And I admire him because he just persevered and built up his business.
He invites you to come and read the palms of various people. Did you actually read his hand at any point?
No.
He didn't want to reveal himself then?
No. It was enough that he'd given me the facility of his main office in Holland Park to read all his staff's hands because he was interested in it. I didn't report back to him saying this person is rather highly nervous or whatever.
Yeah, you want to watch that guy. He's on the fiddle.
Yeah, you have to be very careful. I met him coming out of the lavatory. That was the first day I went.
You don't want to look at a guy's hand when he's just come out of the lavatory. Definitely
no. And I was just in my raincoat, and I'd just been in this pouring rain. And I was just going to go to the loo, and the door was closed. And so I was just going to sort of step back. And then he came out, doing his trousers up, and he said, "Hi, I'm Richard," and shook hands with me. So I said, "Hello, I'm Diana. I've come to..." He goes, "Yes, I know." And so off he went, and I sat down on the loo thinking, I've just shaken Richard Branson's hand.
Can you not do sort of like super quick readings? You might have been able to foretell that he was about to become one of the kind of most successful business people in Britain.
Well, I think he already was, you see.
Right, okay.
I mean, there was no way I could have embellished what he already had achieved.
You know, you basically sort of seamlessly blended or crossfaded these two careers of, you know, fashion designer and making clothes, and this more esoteric thing of palm reading. And of course, both those things are sort of is what I associate with swinging London and the counterculture, because there was, of course, you know, all the fashion stuff, say, on the King's Road. And particularly then, but I also associate Chelsea with that more esoteric thing as well.
That's what the 60s was about. It was getting in touch with your real self. And to me, how the brain works is the beginning. To know how somebody's brain works by looking at their hand. You can give them an awful lot of help. And you can almost see that they're writing their own story. They're writing their own lives.
You carried on with both things, but actually then you told me that one day, 20 years ago, you're back on the King's Road walking down, and you walked into Wilde Ones, which is a sort of esoteric shop, and you started to become their in-house palmist there, right?
Yes, I was a bit skint, and the bank had said, "We can't give you any more overdraft." And so I walked across the road to this little Wilde Ones shop and walked in and said, "Do you ever need a palm reader?" I left them my flyer, which said, you know, had worked at Richard Branson's reading hands at, and he said, can you do mornings? So my own publicity had worked well for me. And so I went back and started working some mornings for them. And then I started getting more and more customers. Can you do an afternoon? Can you do this? So then I just stayed, really.
And you've been there ever since. We're actually running out of time, and I just wanted to mention the fact we were planning at one point for Diana to do a live reading, as it were, of me and my palm. But we decided it was plenty to fit into an hour already. And but she did do a mini reading, which she sent me earlier, and quite startling stuff. So we are going to follow up on that. And maybe we'll record it and put it out if it's interesting enough. But Diana, we've come to the end, and I wanted to thank you so much for coming to the Bureau of Lost Culture to tell us some of your wonderful life and times in swinging London and the counterculture. Wonderful stories and wonderful times.
Well, thank you, and you've been a wonderful listener and a wonderful encourager. And I've already drawn your hand into my notebook. Not a bad hand at all. It's
Thanks.
A good hand.
Thank you for saying that. I just wanted you to relieve my anxiety that there's something terrifying going on in my life that I wasn't aware of. Thank you so much. You are a wonderful person to interview and to talk to at the Bureau of Lost Culture.
Well, I'm carrying on living, helping people and creating things.
And listener, she is still at it. After our conversation, Diana sent me a couple of poems, one from a long time back and one recently written. I worry a lot about where life is leading and what will I do if it all gets much worse. But I'm eating a peach at 4 a.m, and listening to Strauss and looking at Bruce Springsteen, who's looking right back at me. And life's still surprising and still being written. So what's wrong with listening to Viennese waltzes and eating a peach at 4 a.m? Since our conversation, I know that Diana is back at Wilde Ones on the King's Road. Hopefully that'll stay open during these uncertain times. So if you're in London and you get a chance, you could pop in and say hello to yourself and even get your palm read. Thank you for listening. Also, thanks to Paul Gorman, because actually he sort of turned me on to Diana and her wonderful work, and also pointed out something which we didn't talk about, which is that Moschino, the fashion label, run by designer Jeremy Scott, recently, how can I put this, borrowed very heavily from Diana's designs at Mr. Freedom and didn't acknowledge her. That seems a great shame. I'm sure, though, she's so positive, she probably doesn't care, really. Anyway, thanks to Paul for all that. You can also read his blogs on the shop where Mr. Freedom was and the way that has morphed over the years. After Mr. Freedom and Paradise Garage, as we heard, there was Let It Rock with McLaren and Westwood, and then Sex, then Seditionaries, and on and on and on. It's still there, of course. So, do come back, join us on some other occasion to hear more tales from the underground. I'm Stephen Coates. This was the Bureau of Lost Culture. See you next time.